just want to take a moment and say a huge thank you. Thank you all for the love and support that you have shown us literally since day one and all throughout the last year. It is because of you that we actually got named Apple Podcast Top Show for the second year in a row, which is honestly just so validating because it continues to show us that our crime junkies just get it. You guys get what we're doing here, and the more people who listen to this show means the more awareness and good that we can bring to these cases. So again, a huge thank you to our crime junkies. We quite literally couldn't do it without you. And so today I actually have two stories for you, both of which are about one rising threat which you may not have heard of, but you need to know about: sextortion. And this is one of those episodes that is so important for everyone to hear, no matter your age, your gender, your ethnicity, or background. I am not kidding. Go grab your kids. This is one for them. Because virtually anyone with internet access is vulnerable. And in the digital age, dangers seem to lurk more in your DMs than in dark alleys. These are the stories of Asia Anderson and Walker Montgomery. Asia Anderson is halfway through her shift as a host at an Indianapolis restaurant when she gets a Facebook message notification on her phone. And there's nothing strange about that. It's September of 2014. Facebook is like the reigning champ of social media, and 18-year-old Asia has plenty of friends on the site. But this message is anything but ordinary. And it's not from one of her friends. It's from an account with a cryptic username, something like closed door. There's no profile picture, no personal details, nothing. But the words that are written send chills down your spine.
Ooh.
Hi, Asia. I have to ask you something kind of important. How many guys have you sent dirty pics to? Because I have some of you. Heart racing, Asia rushes to the bathroom and huddles in a stall, just panicking because she had sent a couple of partially clothed photos to someone that she trusted like a year ago. But she doesn't see how this closed door person could have gotten them.
Does she check with whoever she sent them to?
Oh, immediately. And this dude swears he never shared them. And she has no reason to doubt him. So she tries to think of other possibilities. Maybe his account was hacked. Maybe hers was. Or maybe the anonymous person has her confused with someone else. But when this closed door person describes this sticky note that she keeps on the mirror that she posed in front of, that hope flies out the window. Now she is just scared. She has no idea who this person is. She assumes it's a guy, so that's what I'm gonna go with, but she's not even sure. And by the way, he's not sending her just some FYI courtesy message. He says that if she doesn't send more explicit images, he is gonna post the ones that he already has everywhere. So I want you to just imagine being in Asia's shoes, like fresh out of high school, looking forward to college, future full of promise, and now this anonymous person is threatening to ruin everything. Like, her fear feels palpable to me. Even though I'm a full adult now, all these years later, I can imagine what she's going through. I mean, she's afraid everyone is going to judge her. She's afraid of what her parents are going to say if they see these pictures. And the weight of that fear pushes her to go along with it. Plus, this person says she'll only have to send a few pictures. Once he's had enough, he will reveal himself and then leave her alone.
That sounds like bullshit.
Well, sure, but she figures maybe he will get bored eventually and then that will be it. And he does get bored, but he doesn't go away. Instead, this person's demands just grow. Soon photos aren't enough. He wants videos. And these assignments, as he calls them, are downright torturous. I mean, he details step by agonizing step what Asia has to do, when she has to do it, and for how long. And if he's not satisfied with it, she has to redo it. He's also really unpredictable. Like, sometimes he bombards her with messages, but then sometimes he just ghosts her and then just reappears out of nowhere to start the whole cycle over again. And as Asia told our reporter Nina, he revels in this sick game. I mean, he tells her how much fun he's having and that he's watching her. He calls her his quote-unquote slave and other vile names. And he peppers their conversations with racial slurs, constantly threatening to share her images and videos, which she thinks he might be selling. And at one point, this guy even threatens to kill her.
I mean, this has gone so far past just coercion. This is like full-blown psychological warfare.
It is. And what Asia doesn't realize at the time is how disturbingly common this pattern is. These types of sextortionists use their victims' fear and vulnerability to get more sexually explicit content. And the more content they get, the more leverage they have. And all the while, I mean, the perpetrator is isolating these victims from their support systems, which makes it even harder for them to resist or to get help. And that is what happens to Asia. She hides this from everyone, even her family who she's living with. And every night for her is the same: tears, anxiety, and just this feeling of utter isolation. Now, if we fast forward to December 2015, she has been dealing with this shadowy tormentor for more than a year, but he's been MIA for a couple of months at this point. So she's had a little bit of reprieve and she's taking strides to try and reclaim her life. But just when she thinks she's escaped the storm, she is thrust right back into its eye. You see, she recently started a new job at a mall in Plainfield, which is this suburb just outside of Indy. And this is like a decent-sized town, but it's also a really close-knit town. And everyone, and I do mean everyone there, starts talking about one thing: an FBI investigation into an online predator who goes by the name Brian Kill. This Brian Kill person had started a campaign of terror centered around a then 16-year-old Plainfield high school girl who we're going to call Maria. When he's not posting sexually explicit photos and videos of her, he is lobbing graphic threats to kill and or sexually assault her and pretty much everyone she knows, including all her classmates.
Oh my god.
He says he's gonna bomb and shoot up her school and then a neighboring school. He promises to wipe out anyone who gets in his way, be it police, first responders, or even school officials. He even threatens to bomb and shoot up the mall that Asia works at, which has to be evacuated. And then a nearby Walmart, then a high school, and then the mall again. It is like non-stop. And social media at the time is buzzing about this. Brian Kill's racist, sexist, homophobic rants and death threats are screenshotted and then passed around over and over. And the more they roll across Asia's screen, the more she realizes these look awfully familiar. I mean, Brian Kill's mannerisms, language, tone, they are identical to Asia's tormentor. And so she starts thinking, maybe this is why he went quiet on her.
Okay, but how terrifying is this? Because it's confirming all her worst fears, that if she doesn't comply with her tormentor, he's gonna do everything and more that he's threatened.
20K.
And even scarier because it's not like he's just sharing these pictures and videos, which is something Asia was already afraid of, but he is doing it and not getting caught because the FBI is struggling to find this guy. Like, it seems this Brian person is using really sophisticated methods to hide his identity. I mean, he's obviously no amateur.
He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, investigators can't even tell what operating system he's using. So his posts just keep coming. And with that, I mean, the more Asia sees, the more she is sure it is the same person who's been exploiting her. And she's right. Because later that month, out of nowhere, her tormentor contacts her again, apologizing for his absence. He says that he's just been so darn busy trying to ruin Maria's life that he's barely had time for anything else. So he's like openly admitting it, gleefully like fills her in on his recent activities, It turns out that he had started sextorting Maria and Asia around the same time. But he tells Asia that Maria's mom had just found out. And I guess the mom had contacted him, which he'd been like fuming about ever since. And then she reported him to police, which is exactly what Asia wants to do. But now she's more terrified to do it than ever.
And she probably feels more alone than ever, too.
She does. And again, like I can't repeat this enough. Like this dude is clearly not just making idle threats. He really is exposing Maria's photos and videos. And she's thinking, who knows what else this guy
wow,
is.
jackpot.
So she feels like she is almost
Holy
watching
cow.
a cautionary tale unfold in real time.
And probably has the weight of the world on her shoulders, since it's not just her that he's victimizing, that he's threatening.
Right. Well, that's what they do, because at some point, victims do get tired. They start to realize the pattern. They see that it won't end without intervention. And at some point, most of them do want to reach out for help. Like, at some point, you might be like, I don't care what happens to me. You know what I mean? But that's when I think they start threatening other people, because you're like, okay, I don't care what happens to me. My life is, like, over by this point. But I do care what happens to my sister, my friends, my classmates. So everyone in the Indianapolis area is on edge as 2016 rolls around without any arrests. And authorities decide that they're going to hold a public forum to answer questions and hopefully reassure people a little bit. But Brian Kill has a different idea in mind.
If you're tired of your traditional old workout gear, you have to check out Fiori.
Oh, no,
With Fiori,
thank you.
everything is designed to you get an investment, you have 20% off your.
I'm embracing post-pandemic life where and to a lot of different places. Your favorite new podcast, 5G Speed, to go trial a perpetrator, but she acts on any updates.
A little
that
too
the
far.
feds give. Basically, be his eyes and ears. And she begs him not to send her, but
Okay.
he says it has to be her, that he can't go because he fits the profile of the perpetrator. But she doesn't, because, quote, no one's gonna notice a black girl with an afro, end quote.
Oh my god. What profile is he talking about? Did the FBI develop something?
I'm not sure. There's nothing about the feds releasing a profile in any news coverage, and Nina couldn't find anything about it in all of like the court records that we have. We even asked Asia, but she doesn't remember hearing about any profile either. So, I mean, I'm thinking we know this dude is a master manipulator, so it's probably just more lies.
Right.
So on Tuesday, January 19th, Asia and 1,000 other people cram into the high school auditorium for the forum. Brian makes her audio record it and take detailed notes about everything, right down to the outfits that people are wearing. So when Brian starts posting his own commentary about it, everyone assumes that he was there among them.
So were they already thinking that he's local? I guess I imagined him like kind of in far off places, pulling these strings like a master puppeteer.
I don't. Again, we can't find a
salad.
at this point, so no one really knows. But the local angle is what he seems to be going with or trying to get people to believe.
Okay.
Because he says that he actually goes to school with Maria.
Oh.
In fact, by the time of the forum, police had already raided 3 homes and brought some Plainfield students in for questioning. WTHR's David
Yay.
McAnally reports that one of them falsely claimed to be Brian Kill as a quote-unquote joke, which is like the worst joke in history. But I think that the prevailing theory at the time is that the guy is local. And Asia's kind of leaning that way too, although she thinks that he's too tech savvy to be a high school student. She thinks he's older, because the stuff he does is just so over the top. I mean, he's toying with police, he's tagging the police even in like posts and offering suggestions on how to step up their game and catch him. Like he tells them to hack his system using a controversial tool known as a network investigative technique. And it's like a small piece of code hidden inside a file, and once the user opens it, it tracks their real IP address.
Like he's just gonna open a random file someone sends him.
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, he's like toying with them. But he even has like a solution or a suggestion for that too. He recommends that they use Maria as the bait. You know, like have her send him something, and once he opens it, bam, they'll have his real IP address or whatever. What's interesting is, I mean, I think they were willing to try anything. Because according to a piece in Vice Motherboard by Lorenzo Franceschi Bacchiari, the FBI does try that, although I don't know exactly when. But
That's all I got for you, sister.
tailor whatever this code is to his operating system since they don't know what it is, so it doesn't work. Now, eventually, things do calm down in Plainfield, and Brian, who clearly loves an audience, starts sharing more with Asia. And she's listening carefully for any hint that might help her ID this guy, but this dude is cautious. He just likes to brag about his other victims. And she learned that he'd actually been doing this same thing to girls on the East Coast, only that time he was using a different online persona. The Purge of Maine was the name he was using. And he talks to her about his dream of becoming the worst cyber terrorist that ever lived. And in all of this, Asia actually confides in him too. And that might seem odd, but it is actually a common response within an abusive dynamic called trauma bonding. I mean, she has no one else to talk to. He is the only person who knows what's really going on in her life, which he has made an absolute living hell.
Right, I was gonna say, what's going on in her life is him.
Yeah, I mean, it's a vicious cycle. And that's the other thing that I want listeners to hear, because I think it would be easy for someone to say, well, I sent the pictures, I responded to the messages, no one's gonna believe me. But you are still the victim. Asia is the victim, and this cycle often leaves her feeling hopeless and even wanting to die. She thinks that that might be the only way to get away from this guy. But then, just as she's having those thoughts, something changes. Brian Kill sets his sights on Asia's little sister, threatening that if Asia doesn't obey him, he is going to target her instead. And that is the motivation Asia needs to keep going. She has to protect her sister. Plus, she's worried that he's going to find even more girls to destroy. So she wants to help stop him. And if that day comes, she wants to be the one to tell her story. And that day comes on Monday, August 7th, 2017. That's when authorities announced that they've arrested the man behind Brian Kill, the Purge of Maine, and God knows what other aliases. He's 26-year-old Buster J. Hernandez. And surprise, he lives more than 2,000 miles away from Plainfield, Indiana, in Bakersfield, California.
What's his connection to Indiana?
He doesn't seem to have one. The U.S. attorney says he's never even stepped foot in the state. That is until he was extradited here on federal charges of threats to use an explosive device, threats to injure, and sexual exploitation of a child. Now, at first, Asia can't believe it. I mean, there have been so many false alarms. But then she reads an article detailing how Buster made one of his victims, who authorities call Victim 3, go to the forum because she's a quote-unquote black girl with an afro. And that's when it hits her. Like, this really is it. After nearly 3 years of pure hell, she is free from this man. So that's when she dials the number for the local FBI office listed in the article, and her heart,
that is a sad answer, but we're going with it.
And when someone answers, she just bursts into tears, and the whole story comes pouring out of her. It turns out that even though investigators haven't identified most of Buster's victims yet, they actually know who Asia is.
Then why didn't they contact her?
Well, it's a really complex situation. So agents knew that catching this guy was going to be like finding a needle in a haystack. I mean, he's essentially built a digital fortress around himself. And his victims were all over the map. So it was a massive nationwide effort. We're talking wiretaps, surveillance, 100 search warrants, and more than 200 subpoenas. But he just kept slipping through their fingers. It wasn't until the spring of 2017 that he finally got sloppy. And do you want to know what it was that screwed him up? A freaking screenshot that he sent to some victims in Maine. So apparently, the data in it revealed his operating system. So the FBI decided to try and hack him again. And in a totally unprecedented move, Facebook actually helped them do it. Because according to that Vice Motherboard article, people at the company considered him the worst criminal to ever use their platform. They literally had a dedicated employee just to track activity from his accounts. So Facebook paid a cybersecurity firm to develop a new hacking tool. But there was a catch.
I did not
By
write
the
that
time the
down.
FBI had this tool and the legal green light, Buster's operating system was days away from undergoing a routine update. So after that, the network investigative technique would be useless and they would be back to square one. And the challenge was finding a victim
Why
to
can I not
send
do
this thing
this?
to him with like that secret code in the picture or video or whatever.
Because I use
Everyone was
this.
scared, and some, like Asia, had these trauma bonds. So investigators didn't want to approach them prematurely in case someone would tip him off. So luckily, and just in time, they learned about a young woman in Michigan who he had been terrorizing for years. And she was the one to send him the booby trap file, which he opened thinking it was the most recent video that he had ordered her to make, but it was actually footage of her basically telling him to f off. Now, he retaliated immediately, but it was too late. The trap was set. The FBI traced the IP address right to Buster's place in Bakersfield, where he lived with his longtime girlfriend and her 85-year-old grandmother.
Wow,
And when
disgusting.
they did that, that's when they were able to tap his computer. That's when they were able to do some surveillance to really make sure it was him.
Okay, but it wasn't Grandma. We know that.
Yeah, no, it's not Grandma at the house, or the girlfriend, who apparently didn't know anything about what he was doing. Although, I also don't think she was very cooperative once the FBI comes in. Now, it was on August 3rd that agents made their move, which was something Buster had obviously prepared for, because as they stormed his bedroom, he managed to quickly destroy some evidence. But they had gathered a lot to take to trial. A trial that Asia was going to have to be a part of.
As the year is wrapping up, for me, that means it's the ideal time to really reflect on what matters most. The people that I love. And this year, you can join me in resolving to keep your family safer than ever with an award-winning Simply Safe Home Security System named Best Home Security of 2023 by U.S. News and World Report and Best Home Security System we've ever used by my family. Having our home protected by truly changed the know when a door is being opened by visiting simplysafe.com/prime. Amazon Prime is where you get a documentary video right out of whatever you're into.
The depths of his depravity. And he doesn't have a criminal record, but he claims to have pulled up various cyber crimes for years before he started sextorting girls as a so-called game in 2012. And he had an extensive victim list.
How did he even find Asia, or Maria for that matter? Like, what made him target certain areas?
Well, this dude was casting a wide net. And he actually kept stats to track his success. Like,
What the
yeah, he liked to prey on girls or young women who had really bright futures, who cared about their images, their grades, family, friends. That way, they would be more likely to comply. And he said he always introduced himself with the same, like, cut and paste script. And usually, if you remember how he introduced himself to Asia, he's like, I have these pictures of you. Usually, he didn't actually have any photos of these girls.
What a scumbag.
It was just a bluff. Yes. So, if you remember, he convinces Asia he knows about the picture because he talks about a sticky note on her mirror. And what she ends up realizing is that he must have just looked at her Facebook and lifted that detail from other pictures.
Oh my god. So how much time did he spend doing this stuff? I mean, it sounds like more than a full-time job.
Get this. So investigators say that he put in 12 to 16-hour days. It is more than a full-time job.
Why?
Now, lots of people never responded to him, but when they did, he essentially held them hostage, sometimes for years, with endless mind games and demands. And the same as with Asia, he threatened to expose them or to kill them and their loved
awful.
ones. He even encouraged some to take their own lives. And if they resisted him or didn't answer him quickly enough, hell, sometimes if he just got bored, he would share their photos and videos anyway.
I'm so floored at how much time he was spending doing this. Did he not have, like, a real job? How do you spend 12 to 16 hours a day just torturing people?
He was supposed to be taking care of his girlfriend's grandma. Like, that was supposed to be the thing he was doing, but it wasn't like a formal job.
Okay.
And he actually had never been officially employed. So this dude had plenty of time on his hands. And with that time, he left so much destruction in
Is
his
this what I'm
wake.
supposed to be
For
figuring out
Asia,
how to use?
after that
Gain
initial euphoric
access,
relief,
yes.
she was struggling to cope. She was feeling like her body was a crime scene. She was haunted by nightmares that Buster wasn't really arrested and that her phone is still buzzing with his messages. She was anxious and depressed, and in August of 2019, after he's arrested and she's dealing with all of this, she again contemplates taking her own life. But thankfully, she was able to get help. She ends up going through an intensive mental health treatment program and is diagnosed with bipolar disorder and PTSD. She joins a support group, she talks to a therapist, meets with a victim advocate, and she becomes an essential piece of the puzzle in the case against Buster Hernandez. By early 2020, he is facing 41 charges involving coercion, extortion, threats to kill, kidnap, or injure people in a variety of ways, sexual exploitation of minors, child sex abuse material, and obstruction of justice. The government says they know about 100 or so victims who have complied with Buster's demands, but most of them are unidentified. So they are still working to locate others across the globe.
So, what's this guy's defense?
Well, it's not one you're going to be impressed by.
Mm.
To sum it up, when they get to trial, it wasn't me. That's all he's got. Now, the prosecution has lots of dirt on him, but they still haven't dug up that huge stash of photos and videos that they are sure he's got all over the web. And his storage drives are so well encrypted that the FBI still hasn't been able to crack them. But then, in late January, agents find child sex abuse material of another victim on one of his unencrypted phones, a 13-year-old girl from Virginia. And you want to know something infuriating?
Not
You
really,
don't, but I'm going to
tell
tell
me,
you.
aren't you?
Yep, you got it. The Virginia girl had sent Buster some nude photos back in October of 2014. He then contacted her from another account, threatening to post them. She and her mom reported this to police, and some dipped officer accused her of lying, threatened her with juvie, and told her she was just as guilty as the person threatening her.
Wow.
Are you f***ing kidding me?
I wish I was.
That's awful.
This is one reason people don't come forward.
Yeah.
So I hope two groups of people hear this. Victims, you can take your case to the FBI, who understands this problem and who can help. But I also hope local law enforcement is listening to this and understanding the complexity of these situations and realizing there are other agencies that they can bring in who specialize in this. So just because they might not understand it or don't have experience with it doesn't mean it's not a crime that needs to be addressed. So long story short,
this goes on for
they have
forever.
enough on this guy. He eventually realizes that, and on February 6th, less than a week before his trial is set to begin, he throws in the towel and pleads guilty to all 41 charges. No plea deal, just straight up guilty plea. And after that, he voluntarily decrypts some of his devices.
So I'm not
in
sure.
March of 2021, he was sentenced to 75 years in prison.
Good.
And Asia finally gets to tell her story. She actually read a piece of her impact statement for us, and I want you guys to hear it in her own voice.
He took what was supposed to be the most pivotal years of my life. He stole them, and that is time I will never get back. He tried to destroy me and diminish me, and he almost succeeded. Almost. But I am here standing as tall as I've ever been, speaking my truth. I wish this could be a true and final ending, but at the end of the day, there are wounds that will never heal, and psychological damage and trauma that will haunt me to my grave. To my fellow survivors, I pray you find the closure you need, and know that this is not the end. This is just the beginning of us living the lives we deserve.
Okay,
Owning our bodies and becoming the beautiful women we are destined to be. Despite what he said, you are enough. You are not alone. You are loved. You are worthy, and you did not deserve it.
Wow.
From here on, you are no longer a victim. You survived. We are survivors. We are strong, a storm to be reckoned with, and he is nothing.
Asia actually reached out to us once the case was over. And she did that because she says she hopes her story can be a beacon for anyone else struggling. And she also wants to spread the word about something. By the time Buster was sentenced, his victim count was hovering around 375. Most were between 12 and 15 years old, but the vast majority had still yet to be identified by name. So you might be out there, still living in fear, totally unaware that the monster behind the screen is now behind bars. We have a list of hundreds of aliases and screen names that
I love
he's
that you
used
can do
on
that.
our blog
You just hold it
post, along
down.
with a
I love
number
that.
that you can call if you think you might have been one of his victims. So I highly recommend, if anything similar like this has happened to you, that you go check that out. Now, Buster Hernandez is considered to be one of the most prolific sextortionists in American history, which I hate saying since it's probably a badge that he wears proudly. But you've got to remember that perpetrators don't always use the aggressive approach that he favored. Many pose as potential friends or romantic partners, luring victims into thinking that they're in safe, consensual situations. And some do it just for that twisted sense of satisfaction. Others are looking for a payday, or sometimes both. And they're not just targeting young girls and women. Boys are targeted at alarmingly high rates, along with transgender and gender-expansive youth. The financial sextortion of minors, primarily boys, has increased exponentially from previous years. And the results are devastating. Sometimes
some
deadly,
tasty veggies.
like in the case of Walker Montgomery.
Okay.
Thursday, December 1st, 2022 starts out like any other day in Starkville,
So
Mississippi, home of the Montgomery family. Brian and his wife Courtney share a quiet early morning moment, sipping some coffee before the usual hustle to get their kids ready for school. With their firstborn away at college, 16-year-old Walker is the oldest in the house, and since he just got his driver's license, he has been happily ferrying his younger siblings to school. So Courtney goes upstairs to wake him up, but when she opens his door, she is met with a sight that quite literally stops her in her tracks. Her son Walker is lying motionless on the edge of his bed. And for a second, like the briefest of seconds, she wonders if he's playing some sort of joke. Because they love trying to prank each other. But then she sees all of the blood. And she screams out for her husband, who comes running. They call 911 in a panic, but there is nothing that first responders can do. Their son is dead. Walker's dad, Brian, told Nina that the whole morning is just so foggy in his mind, to say the least. But he remembers that at some point in the chaos, they noticed that his gun, Brian's gun, which he keeps secured in a safe, was near Walker's bed. And the realization comes almost in waves, like first they have to absorb that their son is dead, and then that he took his own life. And it's just unfathomable to them.
And they didn't hear a gunshot?
No, Walker has his own room, and I guess with the layout of the house, plus they're all heavy sleepers, they have fans, white noise, all of that, they say that night they didn't hear a thing. Now when detectives ask his parents for insight, they truly don't even know what to tell them. I mean, this came out of nowhere. Walker was a happy kid. He had everything to live for. He was thriving academically and on the football field at his private high school. Loving family, good friends, active in his church. For Brian and Courtney, this just was not making sense. And listen, sure, people who appear to have it together can be dealing with a lot of inner turmoil. But it's really the timeline here that baffles them so much, because the day before, which would have been Wednesday, November 30th, it seemed like the most ordinary of days. Walker went to school, came home, worked out, they all ate dinner, they prayed together as a family like they always did, and they joked around about Walker's truck and some big tires that he wanted to jack it up with. They say that outwardly he was totally fine when he went into his room at around 9:30 or 10. They just don't understand what could have happened literally
overnight.
Yeah, all they know is that whatever it was must have been catastrophic. They turn to the only thing they think might hold some answers, which is Walker's phone. It's the only tangible lifeline to a world outside his bedroom. Like, he doesn't have a computer in his room. This is it. But Brian and Courtney give the phone to police, along with his passcode. And after that, all they can do is wait and see if investigators find anything.
Hello, friend.
In today's market, you may decide to make your current house home sweet home for a bit longer. But are your aging appliances in it for the choose a $50 off .com/grief together? Mourning while police attempt to extract any clues they can from Walker's phone. But after a full month of waiting, they are no closer to understanding what happened.
I don't think I've
It's
seen
not until
Minnie
January
or Goofy.
of 2023
Dang, these grow
that the
so
sheriff's office
fast.
comes through with some shocking news. They've pulled data from Walker's phone, and while the full picture isn't clear yet, what
Like,
they
holy
found
cow.
is chilling. Walker had been messaging someone on Instagram before he died. Walker and this other person had shared some explicit videos with each other, and whoever was behind the account was trying to extort Walker for $1,000.
You said before he died. What exactly is before?
So I don't think they really know much about the circumstances at this point, like if it had been happening for a while or what. Like, the information is pretty limited. But local police are connecting some dots because there have actually been other recent reports of this happening in the area. So what they're doing is they're trying to find out if there's any connection between the cases. And so they bring the FBI on board, which opens its own investigation. And in February, the agent assigned to Walker's case sits down with the Montgomerys, and that's when they're able to really lay it all out for them. It turns out Walker was not involved in some long-term ordeal. In fact, his death was actually precipitated by events that unfolded over just 3 or 4 hours.
What?
Yeah, it started just around midnight on December 1st. That's when he got a direct message from someone on Instagram who appeared to be a pretty girl around his age. And he didn't know her, but they seemed to have some mutual friends, so they began talking about school and football, innocent stuff. And then the conversation turned flirtatious, and she convinced him to go on video chat with her and perform a mutual sex act. Now, what he didn't know was the so-called pretty girl was actually a criminal group in Nigeria using a video that they lifted from somewhere else. And they secretly recorded the whole encounter, and once it was over, they pounced. They told him that unless he paid them $1,000, they would send the video to all of his Instagram contacts.
I
And
think
Walker's
this is
16,
the
he didn't have that
story
kind of
that I
money.
heard
And
on
when they urged him to steal his
TikTok.
parents' credit card, he refused. So for the next couple of agonizing hours, he pleaded with them, begging them not to share it,
Hello.
but they were ruthless. They told him that everyone was going to disown him. They told him his life was going to be ruined.
I mean, you have to imagine he's just in this spiral. And I remember being a kid online and meeting people online, not telling my parents about it, and then to have it turn into this.
And your world is so small then that you think it's over.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember
Oh man, I
being
never want to be a
16,
teenager
especially when,
again.
our parents, we grew up in a very religious home. I can't imagine.
Really strict, really restrictive.
Yeah, there would be so much shame, and I think I would be so consumed with shame and forget all the love. You know what I mean? Now, these people didn't just stop there. They started sending him screenshots, which made it look like they had already sent the video to various family members and friends. Like, literally going through his list of Instagram contacts one by one, which, again, like, if this is what he's feeling inside, is making this worse and worse. And it's when they got to his mother's name that he totally broke down. He was trapped, he felt overwhelmed, he was believing that there was no way out of this. He told the scammers in that moment that he was going to end his life, and they basically told him, go ahead, because your life is already over. Now, the FBI did a deep dive into Walker's phone, and there were no other red flags. So when his family hears this, part of them says there's a sense of relief, like he hadn't been suffering in silence. There's not some glaring issue that they overlooked. He was exactly who they thought he was, a happy, healthy young man. But they are heartbroken to think of how scared he must have been and everything they did as parents to protect him. The private school,
Ooh,
the church,
beach
the
shorts.
keeping him in good circles. All of it was obliterated in a few hours by someone who came into their home and stole their son without ever actually stepping foot inside. And part of this, too, that's important to say, the sextortionist didn't actually send the video to anyone, at least not that we know of. And so Brian, he says that kind of makes their actions worse. Not that he wanted the video out there, it's just...
No, I get it. Like, Walker's gone all because of this empty threat.
Yeah, you want to, like, reach out and tell your kid, like, no, they're lying to you.
It just makes the whole tragedy more senseless. I mean, once the scammers realized they weren't getting the money, why keep pushing? What's the point? Why? Why?
And Brian told Nina he doesn't think for a second that his son really believed that his family would disown him or abandon him or anything like that, but that he probably saw the video as just this insurmountable problem that even his parents couldn't fix.
And you said the FBI knows who did this?
Well, at the time, they tracked the IP address to this group in Nigeria, like I said, although I'm not sure if they know exactly who threatened Walker. Brian says that they're optimistic that someone will be held accountable.
We're just going back and forth between mom and dad.
This is a bigger issue than one group of
It's like when you want to stay at your friend's
after
house.
his son.
So you
Walker
go to your
is
mom, and
actually
your mom
part
goes,
of
well,
a
go ask your dad. And you go to your
devastating
dad, and your
trend.
dad says, well, go ask your
According to
mom.
the FBI,
Oh my goodness,
sextortion
story of
is
my
on the
life.
rise, specifically financial sextortion. In fact, federal agencies and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children issued a public safety alert about it just 18 days after Walker took his own life. Because last year, more than 3,000 minors were victimized, mostly boys between the ages of 14 and 17. And more than a dozen victims died by suicide as a result. And while young people are more at risk, plenty of adults get caught up in this trap too. Case in point, according to an article in the Army Times by John Simpkins,
We're getting a lot of good stuff on this island.
Scammed more than $500,000 from U.S. service members from 2015 to 2018. They did it by pretending to be young women. They would exchange nude photos with them, and then a different inmate would pop in the conversation and be like, hey, that's my underage daughter you're exchanging photos with. Pay up or you're going to jail. And a lot of them did. Plus, thanks to advancements in AI, scammers can slap someone's face onto another person's body or manipulate regular photos and videos to, look true to life. They can look sexually explicit. And the FBI has noticed an uptick in those types of cases, especially involving content taken from social media. Actually, when we spoke with Brian last September, he had just gotten a call from a parent whose child had
What did
fallen
I
victim to
bury
something
to
just
make
like this.
coconut
And
trees?
look, there is no measure that is 100%
Probably not eels.
foolproof. Online predators are constantly evolving their tactics, but we can evolve our defenses too. It is all about being
Shape-shifting.
informed, staying aware, and taking proactive steps to safeguard our online activities. In that FBI public safety alert that went out earlier
So
this
what did
year,
he
you can
bury
find a
to get
bullet point
coconut
list of
trees?
steps to take if you find yourself or your child being sextorted. And first things first, if you discover your child has suffered some kind of online sexual abuse, it's recommended that you make it your very first step to remind your child
Nice.
who's actually at
Thanks,
fault.
Maui.
The person committing the abuse is the only person to blame here. And by victim shaming ourselves or our kids, we are only creating more harm. I have made plenty of my own mistakes. A lot of those when I was younger, and I am grateful that I have parents who loved me through them. Now, it's also recommended that if you find yourself in a situation where someone is trying to extort or threaten you or your children, do not pay them. Do not negotiate. Don't delete anything. You gotta go straight to the authorities. Remember, these scammers are banking on your silence and shame, but the
This
crime is
stuff?
on them, not you. You are not the one at fault.
They look like
You
little
should not feel
brains.
shame. If for whatever reason you get stonewalled, do not stop there. Contact a different agency. If local law enforcement won't help, go to the FBI. And if the FBI won't help, go to a nonprofit.
How does one
organization.
go to the
Now,
FBI?
not sending stuff is the easiest way to prevent it, no doubt, but I don't want us living in a bubble. It's gonna happen. You're not a bad person if you've done that. You shouldn't feel shame about sexuality. We all make mistakes. We all do something we later regret. You know, I mean, I'm 30, almost 35. Like, I've got regrets, you know?
Right, right.
One or two.
I've trusted the wrong people before. A situation like this does not define or devalue who you are as a person. Now, we have a ton of resources about sextortion available on our blog posts and in our show notes for this episode, so please take a moment to check those out. Whether or not you or someone you know has been affected by sextortion,
I want to be strong.
knowledge is power. But Crime Junkies, there is only so much we can do over here at AudioChuck to arm people with ever-evolving information needed to hopefully protect ourselves and our loved ones from sextortion. So on that note, you know, Britt and I could never forget that December 18th is National Crime Junkie Day.
Absolutely never forget that.
And just a friendly reminder, the whole point of National Crime Junkie Day is to do what I know our crime junkie community does best, and that is to give back to the people and organizations doing the work. You can visit audiochuck.com/advocacy to see what organizations AudioChuck has supported in the past and see where
Wood
you may
and
want to give your
silk.
time or money to, like the nonprofit I helped found, Season of Justice. And this year, for National Crime Junkie Day, AudioChuck is excited to add SOSA to that list. SOSA stands for Safe from Online Sex Abuse. And as their website states, SOSA's mission is to provide
Would
information and
dig
care in
around
every
the
step of the
island.
online sex
Okay.
abuse process, from prevention to intervention and support for those who have experienced this type of abuse. The work SOSA's founder, Rue Powell, and her entire team are doing is seriously next level. You can even see some of it for yourself on their series, Undercover Underage, on Investigation Discovery. According to the SOSA team, our support is going to allow SOSA to provide therapy for their employees, purchase decoy phones and phone plans, rent more office space, develop their survivor fund so they can continue offering therapy services for the survivors that they work with and their immediate families as much as they're able to, and so much more.
Yeah, Rue and her team are seriously superheroes.
Heroes.
I had the absolute privilege of getting together with Rue for an interview as we were, putting together this episode, and she shared with me how and why she started SOSA, how online sex abuse has evolved, and it's really becoming more and more sophisticated over the years. And I really appreciated that she got really into the weeds on specific ways kids are finding themselves in vulnerable situations and how we can protect ourselves from those situations. And you can listen to that conversation right after you finish up this episode.
Yeah, we're posting that whole conversation with Britt and Rue as an expert on, and we haven't done that in a while, and this one, again, is so important for every person to listen to, every parent to listen to have your kids listen.
I took so many notes just talking to her. It was incredible.
Yeah. And it's all, everyone out there, if you're a parent, it's your turn to take notes and get prepared to have tough conversations with your kids about the dark corners of the internet. Because it's your job to maintain open lines of communication with your kids. To
These
have
graphics
these
are so cool.
And then have them again, and then have them again, and have them again. And above all else, let them know that they can come to you with any problem,
What
any
is
mistake,
it?
and you will love them and help them through it. It may not be easy. There are consequences for all of our actions, but I never want my daughter to feel so embarrassed or so ashamed or trapped that she doesn't see me as her way out. So Rue's interview with Britt is available right now, and it is loaded with information and pointers from Rue herself. So after you're done listening here, please be sure to check that out. Check out SOSA. Again, their information is linked in our show notes. And help us in showing them all the Crime Junkie love on this National Crime Junkie Day. Which, by the way, Britt, happy 6 years. I can't believe we've been doing this 6 years. It's amazing.
Absolutely bonkers, wild, amazing, incredible, all the things.
And this episode, I think, is just such a great way to, I don't know, they're not ringing in the new year, ringing in our 6th year. This is what we want to do. This is the information we want to be bringing to hopefully make a difference. Now listen, I know I've said a lot today, but I do want to end on one note. I want you to trust that there is life after images. And know it feels all consuming in the moment, but this incident does not define you. Your life is so much bigger than this one thing. Do not let anyone take that from you. Let's just pop that shame bubble right now. There's this line from one of my favorite songs by Noah Reed that kind of encompasses what you learn as an adult, and you don't have the perspective for it when you're young. It's gonna sound funny out of context. You should listen to the song. It's called Tiff Song. The line is, "I was young then. How could I know that the mistakes I made would fade away like names pissed in the snow?" And it's true. Trust. Again, there is life after images. And if you or someone you know is thinking about suicide, support is available. Call or text the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988. Or call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. We love you, crime junkies. Be weird, be rude, and most importantly, stay alive.
To the small islands. That's probably wrong.
You can find all the source material for this episode on our website, crimejunkiepodcast.com.
And you can follow us on Instagram at Crime Junkie Podcast.
And next week is the holidays, so I'm not even gonna mess with you guys. We're quote unquote taking it off, but I wouldn't leave you guys hanging. We have never left you hanging in the last 6 years. You're gonna get a couple of special precedent episodes, and then Britt and I will be back the Monday after that. So we'll see you in the new year.
Not here.
Crime Junkie is an Audio Chuck production. So, what do you think, Chuck? Do you approve?
The holidays start here at Kroger with a variety of options to celebrate traditions, old and new.
It's from a great...
My husband's family. He has a lot of... Whether or not... If you're thinking me with Ben...
No. Was there not another episode? This one.
Apple Card is the credit card created by Apple. Apply for...
or and when you speak openly with your doctor,
Stay Alive Sextortion, go back and listen, because this episode is actually a bonus episode. Now, buckle up, because I was lucky enough to have a conversation with the one and only Rue Powell, who we talked about at the end of today's episode. Rue is the founder of SOSA, a nonprofit dedicated to raising awareness in combating online child sex abuse and exploitation. During our conversation, we talked about the work that SOSA is doing,
talk to Moana.
how to stay safe online, how our crime junkie parents out there can best support
You
their
like my
kids,
dog, my
and
Meg.
so much more. So,
I see you down there.
without further ado, Rue, I'm so excited to talk to you today. I think the first question that I'd like our listeners to know is to hear a little bit about you and SOSA and how you came to create SOSA.
Okay.
Yeah, so
BRB.
SOSA is a 501c3 nonprofit, and our goal is ending online sex abuse, or ending sex abuse in all its forms. So it originally started where I've been this kind of career long writer, and child advocacy has always been a really big part of that. And I was also working in tech, and one of the things that we saw was online sex abuse. We saw a lot of other tech adjacent concerns, right? Like bullying and just everything that comes along with having a smartphone now. And what I wanted to do was really demonstrate the ubiquity of online predation. So what we ended up doing is I led a team of designers and writers, and we just took a photo of me and de-aged it a bunch. And I just wanted to show parents what can happen when a kid's online. I did this because I think for parents who are my age, like my parents never worried about a smartphone or Snapchat. They worried about my grades, me boozing at prom,
I'm back.
anyone that was in like the
Yay.
close vicinity to me, right? So
Like an actual physical curfew, stuff like that.
yeah, if I'm walking home from school, they're worried about if a guy in the 7-Eleven parking lot is going to throw me in a trunk, they're not worried about anyone beyond who is in close proximity to me. But now with a smartphone, it's not just the guy down the road, it's somebody states and states away.
Right.
So this is brand new territory. I wanted to really show the ubiquity of not just the ubiquity of online predation, but how it happens and how fast it happens. So we put this fake person online, and it happened very quickly. It just started coming in, and even in working in the tech industry and working in this safety space, we were all still shocked at the amount. So then I wrote a piece about it. It went viral. I left that company. I started SOSA. I decided that this is the part of the internet that I want to explore and do more work on.
So, one of the reasons we're talking to you is we're covering sextortion in one of our episodes, and can you speak a little bit to
It's a
what that looks like, what the
fish.
technology maybe is, and more about what you've seen?
Ha.
I mean, I have people who say, like, oh, I am really worried about my daughters. And it's very gender specific. I'm worried about
Okay.
my teenage girl, but not my teenage boy.
How weird.
And it's really important for people to know that kids are targeted irrespective of gender, sexuality, identity, race, etc. So parents who maybe start to tune out because they only have sons, I would caution that boys are targeted online. And so a way that happens, and there was a period of time where I was getting a phone call a week about this from a local parent that was very concerned. So you've got, a cute 14-year-old boy who's online posting on Snap or Instagram or just any typical social media platform, and a cute 14-year-old girl adds him, and they're chatting back and forth, and at some point,
It's
the
comfortable.
conversation turns sexual or romantic or however you want to call it, and this girl starts sending photos, explicit photos, and starts asking for explicit photos in return. Oftentimes, that's not a 14-year-old girl. That is an extortion ring from another country, and they're using photos of exploited children in order to get more photos of exploited children that they can disseminate, but most likely use to extort. So it's, hey, you need to PayPal or Zelle me $500, or I am sending these photos to your coach, to your team, to your parents, to everyone at your school. And the threat of that is very scary for a young person, especially because they're blindsided. They had no idea that this wasn't a peer. Like, they thought they were having a, romantic escapade online. And people will ask all the time, like, well, are online predators ever women? And usually that's no. Usually, if a woman is a predator, she is preying on people that she already knows, people in close vicinity to her. So we're talking about, like, the teacher-student dynamic, or the coach, or the youth pastor, or the neighbor, that sort of thing. It's never really a woman going online trying to find a random kid.
But we
So,
can't get
because
down
of
there.
that, if people think that their kids are safe in some way, there's
Can we?
also this really awful piece of sextortion that happens, and we've heard about it
My
in TV
phone's
shows
gonna
or
die.
in news for adults, for grown-ups.
I'm probably
like,
almost
I
done
have this boyfriend
anyways.
who's in another country, and now all of a sudden he's
Okay.
telling me that if I
Where
don't
is
send
she
him
gonna
money,
be?
he's
She's
gonna
not gonna be
turn off.
comfortable unless
But
she's by
also
the
happens to
water.
kids, too.
So, in your opinion, I mean, like you said, parents are kind of thinking, I would see these changes, I would see a difference, I would know that it's happening. What are some of the biggest misconceptions about online sex abuse?
See,
Well,
look
I
down
think
there.
a lot of it is, I think parents think, like, oh, well, it would never be my kid. My kid is a good kid. And it really isn't about being a good kid or a smart kid. It's just about being a kid on the internet.
Mhm.
And it's not about, like, I don't know, I think that there are this preconceived notions that, and parents will say, and they mean the best, but they're like, well, there are these girls online posting photos of themselves in their swimsuits at the beach. I'm like, yeah, we all do that. That doesn't give people the right to abuse them, right? They're just being teenagers online. I think some of the misconceptions include that it doesn't happen often.
So maybe somewhere around
And
here.
I think that's because we see all these, like, wild stories online, like,
That just grew
man
before my
drives
eyes.
12 states in order to pick up such and
Can we
such
go down
kid.
here?
It doesn't always happen at that extreme, but it happens a lot. It is not rare. I think that every time I go speak with a bunch of high school kids, I go, hey, how many of you have had, like, a random DM from someone that's like, oh, you're so pretty, you should be a model,
Yeah,
and it
let's do
turns out
that.
they were, way older than you. And And everyone's hands go up because every kid has experienced this. Not every kid, but most kids have experienced this in some form.
Right.
And it takes a long time. That kids know that they're being abused because it doesn't read as the wrong thing at first. It's just, hey, there's this person who is being so nice to me and is asking me about my day and is offering to, give me advice and be like an older brother figure in my life. Those aren't necessarily red
Much
flags.
better.
In fact,
Thank you,
we've
Marilyn.
seen plenty of conversations where a perpetrator will groom without ever using sexual language or a curse word or anything that necessarily seems overtly sexual, but grooming is still happening.
Right. So what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes or ways we maybe don't realize we're making ourselves or our children more vulnerable in these situations?
I think the number one thing that's keeping perpetrators safe is victim blaming. And I know that's a really bold thing to say, but predators know that society victim blames. It's like the online version of, well, what was she wearing? Did she drink? Was she...
The shame element.
Yes. Yes, 100%. And I think that, you have a kid who's online, who's curious, just like I was in those AOL chat room days, like, oh, what is this chat room?
The Wild West of the internet.
Yeah,
right.
age, sex, location, want a cyber. Of course, like, a kid is curious, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if something happens, if they feel like somebody's going to shame them or
Hello,
blame them,
Goofy. I've
or
not
even
seen
if
you
they're
all
being
day.
targeted and they go, hey, parent, look, I'm being targeted, and the parent's response is to go, how could you? Like, how could you be so stupid? How could you be so dumb? Like,
what did you do?
Right, like, you posted this TikTok of you, like, shaking it. All these things that genuinely don't matter.
I don't have
Like,
any of
also
that.
put kids online
Sorry.
covered neck to knees with, like, nothing remotely salacious happening, and these perpetrators are coming in anyway. But the point is, shame is what's keeping kids from sharing. Like, the fear of shame, the fear of being blamed. And if a kid's not going to report because they don't want to be shamed, and they're suffering in silence, then the perpetrator is getting away with this. And they know that. And they keep doing it, which is why so many online perpetrators have multiple victims. And that kind of goes in line with, like, punishing a kid, too. Like, oh, Britt, this terrible person was terrible to you online. That's it. I need to take your phone away because I don't know what's happening online. That's punitive. Especially when there's this, like, social currency that comes along with being a teenager and having a smartphone.
Right.
If the result is punitive, then of course a kid's going to be reluctant to share what happened to them online.
Kind of protective of what's going on so that they can have this thing that's connecting them to the outside world, that they're still curious and they're still, like, not all bad stuff is happening on there. They still want that connection. They're protecting that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and I'm very pro-internet. I think the internet is great. It allows us to talk. It allows us to know what's happening in the world. You can, like, learn a hobby. You can learn how to, I don't know, crochet online. Like,
that's what I did.
Yeah, there are great things online. But there are also these, parts of the internet or these avenues that can be abused.
Oh, I
And
can't
so
get that.
that's why I think parents will sometimes, or caregivers will sometimes have, like, a quick talk, like, hey, don't talk to strangers, or don't send news, and kind of that's it. But, I have
Okay,
teenagers.
we're probably gonna put
and
Moana down
the
here
conversation
somewhere.
is ongoing. It's kind of like the sex talk. I don't just have the sex talk with my kids once, and then that's it. It's a conversation that we're constantly having, and the same goes for online safety.
Right. No, that makes a ton of sense. So in addition to, keeping these lines of communication open with their kids, what can our crime junkies with kids do to best protect their kids in these situations? Like you said, you can't take them away from the internet. You can't isolate them away from this, at least not forever. So what can they do to empower their kids, to protect their kids?
Yeah, well, what I tell any parents or
Hello,
caregivers
Merlin.
is that the best way to prevent predation is to really have open lines of communication with your kids. So that means talking about online safety, that means kind of being a soft place to land for your kids. And I think there's this idea of, hey, let's just delay the phone, let's just take the computer away. And that can happen to an extent, but my kids were turning in homework on their school-issued devices in 3rd grade.
Yeah. I have a sophomore and a kindergartner, and we had some e-learning this week, and my kindergartner has a laptop. Like, she has the internet in her tiny little 5-year-old hands. You can't prevent it.
Right, or even, like, your kid is on a sports team, and so they all are using a specific app to, communicate. And there are parents that will say, or caregivers that will say, well, I'm just going to keep the phone, the iPad, the whatever out of my kid's hands. All right, well, does your kid ever go over a friend's house? Because that friend probably has a laptop, a phone, or it's like when you went over a friend's house and they had, you know, a huge computer and 1,000 free hours of AOL. Like, that's access. So preparing kids for it, irrespective of whether or not they have a phone at the moment, I think
Can I
is really
put just like a
also
look at
really
this
big into
turtle,
teaching kids to trust their gut. Like, if there's something that
dude.
feels off, like if you
Crush.
have,
Hi.
and this translates in real life
Hey.
too, right? If you're at a gas
Be
station,
friends with
and you feel
me.
like your spidey senses are tingling or something feels wrong, you're supposed to trust that feeling.
Exactly.
And same for kids. Like, if something feels weird or ick or gross, tell someone you trust. Tell a parent. Tell a caregiver. Tell a teacher. And I think trusting your gut is a big part of it. So we have these conversations all the time. And this is why I also think not shaming your kids is important, because it's very easy to be tricked. And, you know, it's very easy to trust someone, and instead of looking at it as,
Okay,
oh, my kid
so
broke my trust in these
I
images,
think
look at it as, oh, this person deeply manipulated my child, and this person who is very practiced, very experienced, manipulated my child, and now I have to protect them. So
we
I
can't
think
get
looking
through
at it from
there,
that vantage
so
point
we have
is
to put
really
her
important.
somewhere else.
When you download the Kroger app, you have easy access to savings and for parents who
Come over and sometimes ask a question or two, and they know.
Hello,
they can pull you
Mickey.
aside if something's
Haven't
gone
seen you
sideways
today
online,
either.
You're not sure how to handle it. I think that, I mean, there are a couple things you can
I can give
definitely
you a
look out for,
fruit cake.
but I would always recommend just making all of your accounts private, whether that's Snap, whether that's Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, Discord, wherever. Just making it private, making it friends only, and then just also be a little bit judicious about who you add, because Snapchat has like, hey, we think that you should add these friends, and people just go, you know, click, 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 click down the line. They're just adding whomever. So the rule of thumb with my kids is, unless you know, you can like tell me who they are because you've met them or they're in a class with you.
Okay, let's see
You know,
how
just hold off
big
on adding
her
them for
house
now.
is.
That's
His little
one thing.
vanilla
The other
bees
thing
was
to do, I think, is
huge.
look out for sneaky tactics that a lot of perpetrators
Okay.
will use. One, we call it the white knight tactic. So let's say you're on a forum, you're in a Discord server, you're on Twitch, and someone says something like, oh my gosh, hey, be careful. I know that you're 13, there are a lot of really bad people online, but don't worry, like, I can help you.
I'm not one of them.
Right, like, I can help you, like, you need to be careful, but I'm happy to look out for you. And almost as if they're, like, taking on this, like, big sibling role. Like, you can't trust these people on the internet, but you can definitely trust me. There's also the photographer who thinks you're so pretty and you can be a model, but they don't even have, like, a photography portfolio. They're like, oh, it's in the works, or I can send you some photos and you can send me some photos. And this is a little bit glib, but when we were younger, people would say, all right, if there is a person that comes by and says, hey, can you help me find my puppies are lost, don't go help them. Like, that's a trick, you know?
Right.
I would say there's like a 2023 version of that too, and it's, hey, if you add me on Instagram or Discord or Snap, I can show you photos of my
Welcome,
new puppy.
Moana!
Which sounds absurd.
Yay!
But I feel like at my age, I might fall for that. Like, oh, a new puppy? What kind? Let me see. Send me those pictures. I want to see.
I was gonna say, I'm kind of interested, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, so what we find, people will ask all the time, like, what are the good apps? What are the bad apps? Like, is Snapchat the bad app? What are the safe apps? Is Instagram safe? And unfortunately,
Okay,
the truth is there are no good apps or bad apps, because
capture.
any app that has some
So
sort of chat client
cute.
or has some sort of opportunity for communications, whether that's comments or like a group server or whatever,
Yay.
that is
Hello,
a place that
Moana.
can be used to abuse a kid or start a conversation. So I was consulting with
It
this
is so
tech company that
strange.
does a lot of gaming, and they have one specific app, and it's a coloring book app. And they have been seeing a lot of predatory behavior on it. And I think for you and me, like, I wouldn't think twice about downloading a coloring book app on an iPad and handing it to a kid so they're preoccupied for 20 minutes.
For sure, like, waiting room situations in the car, like, that sounds like an app that I would never give a second thought about.
Right. And that's when you'll see a lot of that too. Like, hey, love your art. What's your Instagram? Or add me on Instagram. Or this is so cute. You would love to see photos of, you know, my puppy or drawings of whatever. Or I'd love for you to draw my puppy. And we see this on lots of different apps. Like, even when we're doing these decoy ops and perpetrators will say, I don't feel super safe texting you. Can you download this makeup app? And I'll download this makeup app and we can talk on the makeup app. Because a makeup app and a coloring book app, those apps seem so benign and innocuous that they don't seem potentially sketchy.
Yeah, and like if you're someone who's accessing your kid's phone or looking into anything for some reason, I wouldn't ever think to look at a coloring book app for like a communication that I was concerned about. That wouldn't be where I went.
Right. Like, we're looking at Instagram, we're looking at Reddit, we're not looking at words with friends, right?
Right. Wow.
So, young person, if you're listening, I will tell you what I tell every teenager in my life, and that is, do not send nudes. Ever. If you ever do, make sure your face isn't in them. Don't do it. But if you do, there's help. NCMEC, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, has a take it down tool, a take it down service. There
Wow.
are people that can help you through this and don't suffer alone, because there are people out there that are very good at doing this, very good at manipulating people. So if you're listening and you're a kid and this has happened to you, definitely go right to NCMEC, tell an adult that you trust.
We talked a little bit about what our listeners with kids and our kid listeners can do, but what about those who don't have kids in their lives immediately? Aunts and uncles, all those sorts of people who are kind of periphery, but maybe aren't the people who are limiting screen time, you know, checking in on apps, stuff like that. What can they do to protect, again, themselves and the kids in their lives?
I think that, the role of cool aunt is very, very important. Because sometimes kids don't want to talk to their parents about it. And I think just
Hey,
being
I'm
an
the cool
adult in a
aunt.
kid's life that they feel like is safe, that
Aunt.
their feelings and emotions are safe with, and they can go to someone and say, hey, this happened to me. Whether you're a teacher or an aunt or an older cousin or even an older sibling, just being able to kind of affirm that this stuff can happen. Abuse is never a kid's fault. Abuse is never a victim's fault. I think that's really important. Even just being able to share resources when needed, or sometimes it's nice to have a buffer with the parent as well, being like, by the way, I know that so and so has this app. Have you had any chats about online safety? NCMEC has lots of great resources. We've got resources on the SOSA's website. Rain has resources. So I think there's a lot of ways for other adults to share. But I think that just being somebody who cares in a non-judgmental way is very important. I would love for my kids to have plenty of people in their lives that they feel like they can go to if something went down, like in an emergency. And that's how I feel about trying to foster a relationship with my kids where they feel like they can come to me. I think when I was younger, if something happened that was bad, I would say, oh my gosh, my parents could never find out. Whereas I hope now that my kids would say, oh my gosh, something bad has happened, I need to call mom because she'll know what to do. If you can be that person that they can call because you'll know what to do, that's always a great thing. I would also like to just say this. If you want to be this person in a kid's life, so my teenagers have friends, and we saw on one of my daughter's friend's phone, it says, Rue, and then call if in trouble. Like, that's what I'm saved as on their
That's
phone.
your contact.
Yeah, Rue, call if in trouble.
Oh my gosh.
Which I feel very honored that a teenager would say, I know to call if I'm in trouble because she'll help me out in some way.
Yeah.
So if you can be that so-and-so call if in trouble on a kid's phone, I think that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I love that. So let's talk a little bit more about undercover underage. What has that experience been like, and how has that media coverage helped SOSA's cause and the cases you're covering?
Yeah, I think television it's kind of the Wild West too. I started SOSA, and then a production company said, hey, can we follow you around with a camera? We really like the work that you're doing. And I said, no, that's really weird. And they said,
Oh, I think I'm starting to get
you reached all of
hungry.
these people with this piece that you wrote. If one of your main goals is awareness, imagine reaching 1 million people per week. And that sounded like a really good way to raise awareness about online sex abuse and exploitation. So that's how Undercover Underage started. I will say that, we do this work irrespective of the
My
show.
inventory is
So
full
we're
already
doing
again.
decoy ops, whether or not there's a camera.
Oh
But
gosh.
I think that it's been really helpful
Okay, we're gonna have to go sell some stuff because I need some money too, and this is just ridiculous.
And then really to the extreme of like, most of the time when we catch a perpetrator, this has not been their first time, right? They have a long list of, or they do the forensic examination of the phone, and there are multiple messages. As far as the media helping, one of the things that we do as well is we advocate for better legislation. So we helped pass in Connecticut, which is where SOSA is based, a bill, HB 6737, and it's essentially the act of communicating with a minor in a sexual manner. That's now illegal. You might think that that's illegal everywhere, but it isn't necessarily. So you can have a 50-year-old man reach out to a 9-year-old girl for photos of her feet so he can, self-gratify. And that's considered creepy, but not a crime in many states. We think it should be a crime everywhere.
Yeah.
So criminalizing online grooming, even if it's not necessarily overtly sexual, I think is important. So we're talking with different states. We've met with some legislators in Florida recently to discuss this as well. So we're hoping as we get one law passed in one state and another law passed in another state, maybe there's a domino effect. Same with advocating for a higher age of consent. So most states, the age of consent is 16. If 18 is the arbitrary age that we choose, that people can vote or serve in the military,
why is
or
16?
whatever, and we also think it's the age that they can, make decisions on whether or not they want to have
Mm-hmm.
a consensual sexual relationship with someone, 40 years their senior.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say, being able to share about that, like online, we also share about our cases and what the verdicts have been. So sometimes I have to testify. A lot of these cases end up, going to a plea deal, right? But
New
sometimes they
crafting
go to trial, and sometimes I
recipe.
have to testify. And so one of our cases, he ended up getting a sentence of 20 years in prison and 10 years probation, which is our biggest sentence to date.
Not
And
good. Come
I
back.
think what that has also done is raise awareness about, okay, wait, what exactly was this person doing? How can we make sure that we're adequately punishing people that are doing this? Because he was targeting very, very young children.
Seaweed.
And I think that
Who
being able
knew?
to just raise awareness about that has also pushed legislation in the right direction, has also pushed school education, like educating in schools in the right direction as well.
Right. So what would you say has been the highlight of this journey, getting SOSA started and working on a show like Undercover Underage?
I think one of my biggest points of pride about Undercover Underage, or the work that we do at SOSA and then we share it online, is that we have these people who say, this happened to me when I was younger and I had no idea it wasn't my fault until now. Or I had no idea that what happened to me was bad because
More
it seems abstract.
seaweed. Hey,
We're
there's
talking about
Vanellope.
abuse,
Get
we're always
over here,
talking about
girl.
hands-on
We gotta
abuse.
say hi to
We're
you
never really
too.
talking about abuse that can happen online, and that could be, trying to create CSAM,
Come
child sex
here.
abuse material, and getting kids to send images and sending images back, or being in a relationship. And
I
So
have
I think
something
for a
for
lot of
you.
young people,
Biscuits.
I know you have young
A
listeners
red
here,
passion
but
lily.
on TikTok, like 70% of our audience is over the age of
You're gonna have to
24.
get some seaweed.
And a lot of that is, hey, this happened to me a few years ago, and to hear you say it wasn't my fault has been really, really healing. What I really like about the show, so Undercover Underage is rated TV-14, and even though it's a show that could be very much rated TVMA just because of the content, but everything's been sanitized to make it TV-14, and one of the reasons why is because we're hoping
Look at
that teens watch
those.
it, or we're hoping that people watch it with their kids or kids that are, important to
Yay.
them, because it becomes a tool for communication.
She can be my
I mean, I'm
fishing
sure you know,
buddy.
having a sophomore, sometimes speaking like eyeball to eyeball is difficult. It will bring up a lot more honesty.
Thanks,
Like,
girl.
if you're driving in a car and you're both staring at the same road, right?
Oh, for sure.
That's when like those conversations become a little bit more vulnerable and honest. It just seems less risky. Like it's a way that you can kind of connect with your parent, and it feels less, I don't know, like
It feels like there's like kind of always an out.
Yay,
we've
like,
got
some
and
new
the conversation will be over,
materials.
Or another thing, like
I think I
late at
stayed
night,
stuck
right
for a little
before
too
bed, you're getting a
long.
glass sip of water or something, and like, okay, like
On the
you can't
first
keep me up forever, so
part,
if I start
I
this conversation now,
wanted...
we can have it, and then like 10 o'clock will happen, and I'll have to go to bed or whatever. And like those little moments where you can really connect are so incredible. And yeah, to have a show like this as a resource to utilize and to connect over and to reference back watching it and rewatching it to prepare for this, my husband kind of like walked in on a couple episodes, and like we started conversations about like, okay, what does this look like implementing in our family? What does this look like in how we start conversations with our son who's a sophomore or our daughter who's, you know, in kindergarten? But like, this is a conversation that we're going to have to continue, like you said, to have with her, maybe not now in very graphic details, but like a conversation that is going to be for the next 10, 15 years of her life.
What
in our
is
communication
that?
with her.
Yeah,
Scrooge.
and those late night talks are so real. It's like the moments before bedtime become like the real world confessional. You know, those from years ago. They're like, hey, I'm gonna get all of this off my chest now.
I think I clicked the
Yeah.
wrong
And so even
thing,
if
but
you don't
it's
necessarily
fine.
have a formal, okay, what did we just watch? Let's talk about it. It's gonna come up at some other time.
Tomatoes.
I joke
Come
that
here.
sometimes my role as the parent is just being a houseplant. Like, they don't necessarily want to interact with me, but they like that I'm in the room, or they like that I'm there. And then eventually they'll want to talk. So I
Cute
do
and
think this is a
cozy.
great subject for houseplant parenting. Like, you can just kind of sit there and wait for them to say something.
Houseplant parenting. I'm gonna have to steal that. Well, the show is outstanding. Just incredible, incredible work, both on the show and with Sosa in general. So, how can our
Is it
listeners
asparagus?
support Sosa and the work that you guys are doing?
Sure.
We run on donations, and we have some really
no.
wonderful people that donate every month. And we have some people that do, you know, once a year giving as well. But we're very good at stretching dollars. We are still like a pretty small nonprofit with a pretty small operating budget.
Small but mighty. Small
Thank
but
you.
mighty.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we support ICAP teams all over, and we pack up these bags and just kind of fly out, and we'll do a quick operation. And I'll say that a lot of times the question is, what separates you from like vigilante groups that you might see online that kind of are running through a Walmart with a phone going because they're live streaming to YouTube. And the difference with us is that we definitely work with law enforcement from the outset. We talk with the DA's office. We know the requirements for prosecution. You know, we're working in tandem with them as opposed
Okay.
to kind of going
I
rogue
think
and calling
I
a lawyer
am
saying,
just
hey, go pick
about
up this
done
guy.
for
Because
today.
those cases are often not prosecutable. We're very proud to say that to date, our conviction rate is 100%.
Wow.
That is amazing.
Yeah. I try to say that we're batting 1,000, but then my team reminds me I don't know enough about sports to be using sports analogies, but I hear that that's an appropriate one, so.
I honestly wouldn't know, so I believe you. I believe that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that, like, even if you are not able to financially support, just following along with us on social, we're really active. We share a lot about tips and tricks in like the bad way, but also in the good way, right? Just tips on how to be safe online. Sharing that always helps with like just raising awareness and exposure. One thing that I always suggest for parents, like, hey, if your kid's on TikTok and you're trying to, you know, make sure they're safe online, if they're begging you for TikTok, you can say sure, but you also have to follow Sosa because we make a lot of content for young people too.
I love that.
Just on how to be safe online. Yeah. For whatever reason, we're just very cool on TikTok. There's a little bit of embarrassing ourselves for the sake of like getting a point across, but it's effective, and if it's a way that we can support young people, great.
For sure. So, I think the
Another
last
turtle.
note I want us to end on is supporting survivors. Can you give us a quick rundown of some of the resources out there that survivors can turn to, and how our listeners can support survivors of online sex abuse?
So photos have been shared online. NCMEC's Take It Down service is great. Also, they have NCMEC's Cyber Tip Line. If you ever come across a perpetrator online, we lovingly tell people, please don't send that tip to Sosa. We can't do anything with it, but let your local law enforcement know. FBI has a tip line as well. If you need resources, Sosa is here. We've got resources on our website, but we also have our Survivor Fund. There's also RAIN, which is a great resource. And I also would even like to mention the crisis text line, because even though that's known for very specifically suicidal ideation, they do help with other issues as well. So keep that one in your back pocket too. I think, generally speaking, first start with like the people in your own lives, right? I think affirming
What
to the
is
people in your
it? A
lives
cod.
that experience this in some way,
Oh,
that it's not your
cod.
fault, is really important. At Sosa, we started a survivor fund
I can't
because
even say
sometimes
it.
it takes you listening to a story to kick up some feelings and realize, oh my gosh, this happened to me when I was younger, or that was really upsetting and I never told anyone about it because I felt so ashamed.
Okay.
So we cover people's survivors therapy. we'll cover like a dozen therapy sessions with somebody who is trauma trained, and we connect.
I think we're gonna
people
call it
with
a night.
therapists
I
that are
gotta
in their
go
own state, 'cause that's
find
usually where
something
they're
to eat.
licensed, right? And being able to
I'll
help
cook something,
facilitate
I
that
guess.
kind of healing, like not just be in the intervention piece, but also be in the, hey, even if this happened 10 years ago, let's talk about it now.
Yeah.
How can you heal from it now?
Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for coming in.
Making people feel validated in what they experienced has been really rewarding for us.
And listening to my Crime Junkies with me on National Crime Junkie Day.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Rue as much as I did. And our hope is that you walk away from this episode armed with knowledge and resources right in your back pocket to keep yourself,
Yeah,
kids, and
so
loved
we're gonna
ones
go
safe
there.
online.
Goodbye.
Find all the
Goodbye.